That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Kept on looking for a way to make it through the night, but I couldn't get it right. No, I couldn't get it right. Oh. Hey, are we rolling? Just a second. We're just getting amped up before we started. Yeah, that was Climax Blues Band playing Couldn't Get It Right from 1976, I think. Pretty apropos for our topic today. Why good people sometimes make bad mistakes. Welcome to the second episode of the Only Human podcast, where we take to task the questions about what it means to be human in a world that grows increasingly inhumane. So for those of you that weathered the storm of episode 1, welcome back, both of you. You'll note we've made a few changes. Hopefully the audio and the lighting is better. And thanks to my most reliable feedback person, a woman I've spent the last 36 years of my life with, she told me to get rid of my cigar. She said, you know what? You don't need the gimmicks, Tony. It takes away from your message. So Sherry, you are right, as always. I want you to know I heard you loud and clear. So today's episode is titled Legends of the Fall, Why Good People Make Bad Mistakes. So I know my audience is sophisticated, and I probably shouldn't have to explain it to you, but I want to do it anyway. Legends are the good people, and the fall are the bad mistakes. Before we get in too deep, though, I want to take just a second and talk about how serious this topic should be. Well, it is for me and should be for you. Human error is the thief of human happiness. It's a slayer of dreams, careers, families, potential, and all too frequently, even life itself. Viewing human error as anything less hostile is to willfully expose your throat to the knife. I mean, those are harsh words. They're intentionally harsh. For thousands of years, people have hidden behind Cicero's famous quote that true error is human. But the cost is too great to continue an apathetic and complacent path like that. So we're going to change the dialogue. To improve is human. To grow is human. To learn is human. But to persevere in avoidable error, at great risk to our lives, our families, our friends, our careers, the public at large, that's inhuman. It's time for some new poetry on this subject, and that's what we're going to do today. Unintentional and avoidable errors poison relationships, it squanders wealth, it feeds addictions. And like I mentioned, it ruins careers. And that's always been true. Error is a persistent and progressive thief who will continue to steal from you on an ever greater scale until you make a conscious decision to stop being a victim. Listen, the only mistake we ever make that we can't learn from is the one that puts us in the grave. And so today we're going to try to learn how to avoid that one and learn from all the rest. So many of you know that in a previous life, I was a B-1 bomber instructor pilot. And I got seriously interested in human error when two of my former students flew a perfectly functional B-1 bomber into a mountain on a moonless night in 1992. The cause was pilot error, but they didn't go much deeper than that. And I began to wonder, why would good people like Zen and Paul make a series of mistakes that they made? So I pondered that for a while, and I ended up actually publishing a couple of books early in my writing career, Redefining Airmanship and Flight Discipline. And one of those books ended up in the hands of a Marine Corps colonel that had had a similar problem, except he'd been assigned the task of operationalizing safety for the U.S. Marine Corps after they'd had a series of mishaps with highly experienced pilots. And His name was John Davis, call sign Dog, Harrier pilot. And what he said to me, he says, Tony, why is it that some of the best people we have flying perfectly good airplanes on training missions in good weather don't come home? What is it about the best we have that they make the worst mistakes we can make? And I realized if I was ever going to find the answers to that question, I needed to get a lot smarter, right? And as part of that learning process, I ran across a book by a guy named Dietrich Dorner. And that book was called The Logic of Failure. I got it here somewhere. Here we go. And I'm gonna read you a couple of quotes. This is dog-eared and notes in the columns and underlined and highlighted. But I want to read you a couple of quick quotes out of the introduction to The Logic of Failure. Professor Dorner says, failure doesn't strike like a bolt from the blue. It develops gradually according to its own logic. People court failure in predictable ways. We need only apply the ample power of our minds to understand and then break the logic of failure. All right, this is a smart guy, works at the Max Planck Institute, studies this stuff, has for his whole life. So that last line, we need only to apply the ample power of our minds to understand and break the logic of failure. There's that word, right? It's even in the title of my podcast, only, right? As if humans haven't been dealing with human error for the past 60,000 years. But Dorner was onto something, that people do court failure in predictable ways. What we're going to learn today is that if we say people and we're thinking lots of people, that gets really complex. But if we say person, meaning you and I, it gets a lot simpler. And that's really where we're driving at today. So over the next few minutes, we're going to make 3 main points, I hope, and clarify this a little bit. Point 1 is that errors are usually unintentional, but not always. 2, this is a critical one. Errors must not be viewed through the lens of outcomes. We can do a lot of things wrong and still be successful, or we can do almost everything right and have a failure. So we've got to decouple our errors from the outcomes. And then finally, maybe most importantly, we all have a personal fingerprint of error. So if we can discover that, we're well on our way to reduce both the number of errors and their consequences. Okay? All right, let's get into it. Point 1, in the strictest term, errors are unintentional acts. Right? If you do something intentionally, it's not a mistake. But maybe, like everything else in human performance, it's not that simple. Let's take the example of somebody that gets busted for drunk driving. Right? They made an intentional decision to get behind the wheel, right? So in the pure sense of the word, that's not an error. See, the errors came in earlier decisions that put them behind the wheel. And that was likely the result of several things they just didn't recognize along the way, or at least didn't recognize as the potential for them to make a bad decision later. So James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits, and he says something, let's see if I can get this right. It's hard to save a poor early decision with good late decisions. So maybe you didn't intend to stay past 1 or 2 drinks, but then that one buddy comes in with something to celebrate and he buys a round of Patron. Right? You and I both know there's never just one round of Patron. Right? So mistake early, then another mistake, and now our judgment's clouded by the alcohol, maybe fatigue. But you can see where I'm going with this. Early decisions prevent bad late decisions. Things can be improved by making better decisions along the way, but the effects of a poor early decision, it tends to linger. Okay, second point. Errors can't be viewed through the lens of outcomes. Let's go back to the drunk driving example. How many times may this person or may we have had maybe a little bit too much to drink, but we're just a little buzzed and we decide we're going to hop in the car and it's only a mile or two home anyway, and we're successful. What do we learn from that success? We learned that we can get away with it. So was that a bad decision? Well, of course it was a bad decision, but we don't recognize it as such, right? All right, now here's where we're going to get into the really good stuff. Stuff you can apply right away to make a big difference in your life. Why do good people make bad mistakes? Well, like in everything else in human performance, it depends. Part of my philosophy on this goes right to the beginning of this, and that what is it that defines a good person? Does being good, morally or ethically, or maybe more specifically, good at something, is it possible that puts us at more risk? And I've come to believe that that actually might be true. I want to use an example from my days in the U.S. Forest Service, where there was a triple fatality in a wildland firefighting event called the 30-mile fire that occurred up by a little town in northern Washington called Twisp, Twisp. And the short version of this was that there was a team of firefighters, mostly experienced, but a few brand new rookies. They got trapped in a canyon, one of those canyons in the Rocky Mountains where there's one road going up a stream into the canyon and therefore one road out, right? And so they got trapped behind the wall of fire in the canyon. But the fire wasn't to them yet, and so they made a really good decision. They decided they'd drive away from the fire along the stream until they found the perfect place to ride out the fire. They have deployable fire shelters, they've got training. So they do that. They drive several miles back up the canyon and they find this wonderful spot, mostly rock on both sides of the canyon, not a lot of trees and brush to burn. And the creek is wide and there's a sandbar in the middle of it. It's like if you're going to be trapped by a wildland fire, it's a perfect place to ride it out. So they stop and they do a quick briefing and they said, okay, we're going to stay down here close to the creek. We're going to walk out across the creek. We're going to deploy our fire shelters on the sandbar if it comes to that. Right? So the fire was still 30, 40 minutes away. It was moving very, very slowly toward them. They could see it. They could see the smoke plumes coming. A couple of them decided they wanted to walk away from the creek up on the rocks about 60 yards away to have a cigarette. Right? So they walk up there and they're shooting the bull, and their boss, kind of a mild-mannered supervisor, says, come on, you guys, come on down here. We said we were going to stay around the creek. They're like, it's fine. Fire's still a couple miles away. And by this time, a couple of the rookies had gone up there with them. And interestingly, as the discussion continues, the rookies and the leader of the rookies was a young lady who had come fresh out of training and had actually been like captain of her college basketball team, had some leadership skills, right? And she said, I'm going back down. And they go, you got lots of time. You don't need to go down. And she goes, yeah, you guys should come with me, right? The other rookies that were up there on the ridge came down with her, but the seasoned veterans, the legends, did not. The fire came around the corner and did something that they say blows up. The fire blew up around them. So it may be coming 2 or 3 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour, and then it hits an area where the sun has superheated the fuels and it just blew up around them. And the three legends, the three experienced firefighters, died on that rocky scree pile, mere yards away from safety. The rest of them survived. So what breeds that kind of experience-based mistake? Is it complacency? Is it hubris? Is it the thought that maybe we're good enough? We don't really have to manage the risk like we normally do, or we don't really need to think this through because we're experienced. You know, my dad was a game warden, and he taught me a lot about moving around in the wild. I grew up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula with a bicycle, fishing pole, and .22 rifle, and tens of thousands of acres, swamps, lakes, and streams to run around in as my playground. We didn't have any video games back then, but I can't imagine, even if we did, that there's anything more fun than what I grew up doing. But you know what? I've spent most of the last 50 years outdoors in some pretty wild environments, but I've never lost respect for things that can bite me or cause me pain. Okay? And that's before I ever leave the house in the morning, right? Just outside. But here's the point. The point is that there are a lot of lessons we can learn from experience, but we can never lose respect for the things that bite. Here's a keeper from my time in the wild. Might help any of you out someday on vacation. Never drive a vehicle, any vehicle, four-wheeler, Jeep, your family sedan. Never drive a vehicle into the wild further than you can walk out. Machines fail, right? Machines fail. And over the past few decades, I've had to walk out a few times. But I'm always in the back of my mind, we're not going up here where we can't walk out before dark or before something, right? The point here is that familiarity can breed complacency, only if you allow it to. And so many of us get caught up in what I call a crushing grip of mediocrity. We're experienced, we do enough to get by, we don't see the need to do any better, and we allow ourselves to make unnecessary mistakes without learning from them or learning the wrong lessons from them. Then one day, that same mistake we've made 100 times or maybe 1,000 times without consequence suddenly bites us hard. Something's different in the situation or whatever. You see, there's really no such thing as good enough, at least not for people who are striving to get better. That's why errors can't be viewed through the lens of outcomes. All right, well, it's time to pay the bills here on my podcast, and I want you to know that we won't do a whole lot of this, but usually in each podcast we'll probably have one or two commercial breaks for our sponsors. So we'll be right back with you in 60 seconds.
Hi, Caddy Cadigan here with Converted Performance. I want to take a few seconds to tell you about an aviation maintenance program that has revolutionized the method technicians use to prevent injuries, damage, and ensure airworthiness on every job. It's called Aviation Maintenance Never Events. This program came about after research into the top causes of preventable maintenance incidents discovered that there are 7 specific events that are causing over $20 billion a year in aircraft damage. We started calling these events never events because they're 100% avoidable and should never happen. So far, we have trained over 30,000 technicians in the never events, from small maintenance departments, United States Navy, and everything in between. It has taken over a decade to develop and refine this approach, and believe me when I tell you, this program will change the world of aviation maintenance as we know it. If I told you the return on investment our clients have achieved with this approach, you wouldn't believe me, but we have the data to prove it. So contact me at jcadigan@convertedperformance.com to see the proof, or simply visit our website at convertedperformance.com.
Welcome back. We're starting a new segment today we call it Blue Threat Proverbs. Blue Threat Proverbs are short, pithy statements we've turned into posters, and to me they hold a lot of meaning. I've developed 31 of these so far. I'm trying to get to 52 so I can put them on deck of cards, but so far 31 is the number. And I plan to feature one of these on every episode, so you know you've got at least 30 more episodes coming. Today's Blue Threat Proverb is number 9. And it says, it's hard to fight an enemy that has outposts in your head. It's hard to fight an enemy that has outposts in your head. So reflect back for a second to what we were just talking about, this idea that we're good enough, or we're so highly experienced, or we're experts in this field, and therefore mistakes don't happen to us. Right? That's a barrier. So that quote, it's hard to fight an enemy that has outposts in your head, is actually from a lady named Sally Kempton. She was a 1970s socialite and journalist, and she had some psychological challenges, and she fought them aggressively with meditation and yoga and other things. But I always anchored to that quote because it's sure true for human beings. When we begin to think in bad ways, bad things happen. Because humans are notoriously unreliable when it comes to reflective accountability. We'll make a dozen excuses for why we got behind that wheel, or why we decided not to load something extra in the car or drive that extra 5 miles into the woods that we couldn't walk out of, right? You see, in truth, bad habits of thought are actually more dangerous to you than bad habits of behavior, because they continuously block that objective thinking, and they form an almost impenetrable barrier to accountability, right? Learning to identify these negative thought patterns is not easy, but it's well worth it, and it'll rapidly open up vast new horizons of improvement. So with those two things running in the background, right? You can't judge it based on outcomes. You've got to make sure that your thinking is good, and that errors are usually unintentional, but not always. It's time to get to something that might be the biggest breakthrough on human error I've discovered in over 30 years of studying it. And that is that we each have a personal fingerprint of error. Certain ways that we make mistakes that are very, very individualized to us, almost as unique as our DNA. And further, we tend to make the same mistakes across all areas of our life, at work, at home, with our families, in our hobbies, at social events. So let me again reflect on my personal experience. For me, I've discovered I'm at greatest risk of making a major mistake in 4 specific circumstances. And I don't really understand why, and frankly, I don't even care why. I just know it. And so I've been able to take some countermeasures. Number 1, when I'm competing at a high level. Right? Number 2, when I'm tired. 3, when I put myself behind the time curve and I'm in a hurry. So some of those might ring true to you. Number 4 is kind of a weird one. I make big mistakes right after I've had a major success in my life. Again, if I was a psychiatrist, psychologist, I guess I could dig into why that might be true, but like I said, I don't care. I just know from studying my patterns of performance and looking at what was going on when I made these mistakes, I've been able to discover that when I'm competing, when I'm tired, when I'm in a hurry, or right after I've had a big success in my life, I am primed to make a big mistake. So what do I do about it? So I've changed my mindset about competition. Even in the thick of it, I remind myself I'm not competing against anybody else. I'm competing against myself, right? It's not the golf club's fault. It's my fault. Right? And at the end of the day, win or lose, I can say I gave it my best against what I was capable of doing that day, maybe. But I sleep better at night when I'm not angry constantly for losing or not doing my best. I lean into everything and I make it about, hey, can I learn anything from it? That seems to have worked for me. Second, I always double and triple check anything I do when fatigue starts to set in. I do not send late night emails. Right? I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten up in the morning after I said, I know this is perfect, and found multiple mistakes over a cup of coffee, even though I thought I'd done work flawlessly. Third, I really try to get ahead and stay ahead on my workload, and when I can't, I go back and employ the same tactics I do for when I'm fatigued. Double and triple check things. You can say, well, when you're rushed, how can you afford time to do that? Always time to do it right? Much less time than if you have to do it over, or you tarnish your reputation, your work ethic by sending out crappy stuff. And then finally, when I've experienced a big success in my life, like let's just say this podcast blows up, which I really hope it does. I've got to humble myself very, very quickly and start looking for what I'm about to screw up, because it's happened multiple times in my life. No examples on that one, but trust me when I tell you, some of these were painful. So how do you discover what your personal fingerprint of error is? It's really kind of simple. It's sort of nerdy. Right? Learn what a mistake looks like. A mistake looks like any time to me that I didn't optimize my brain to tackle a challenge. Success or failure, if I took a shortcut, I didn't follow my processes, I didn't follow my procedures, that's a mistake, right? I've actually been able to upgrade my mistakes from having things go wrong to looking back at things saying, I could have done that better, right? That was a mistake. So learn what a mistake looks like and definitely decouple it from the outcomes. 2, look for what was going on when you made the mistake. Now, This is really, really important. Don't try to figure out why you made the mistake. Back when I was telling you about my 4 big fingerprint of error mistakes, I don't care why. If you try to figure out why, you'll rationalize it, right? It'll never be about you. So I just looked for what was going on. Was I hanging out with a friend I shouldn't have been hanging out with? Was I tired? Was I in a particular place, working with certain equipment? Whatever it is, kind of look at what your surroundings were, what the situation was when you made the mistake. As you begin to, and I by the way, I write all this stuff down because it's kind of who I am. It doesn't take you very long to say, okay, if you're with this guy, or you're doing this thing, or you're in this place, bad things tend to happen shortly afterwards. So you're not searching for the why, you're just looking for the who, what, where, and whens. Right? All right, I got another quick story. This one is sort of embarrassing. High school senior, on the football team, honor roll student, National Honor Society. I'm a fairly good kid, but I'm a teenager. I'm fairly crazy. But I got this one friend, right, who's kind of crazy, and I really like him. And he shows up in the parking lot on a Wednesday morning with a brand new burgundy, not brand new, it's a used, but it's new to him, burgundy Lincoln Continental. And I said, well, where did you get that? And he goes, I just got it. My uncle gave me a loan, and it's mine, man. I go, you don't even have any plates on it. He goes, doesn't matter. I'm going to get plates, but hop in. Let's go for a ride. Bad early decision. School starts in 15 minutes. So we hop in, and he says, you know what? We ought to just skip school today. And he says, look at the back. And I open the back, and he's got a cooler full of those old green wide mouth bottles of Mickey's malt liquor. Right, probably a dozen of them in there. He says, let's go pick up Crabtree and Fuson. We'll go to Ann Arbor. We'll make a day of it. By this time, it's like, sounded like fun, one bad decision after another. But it ended badly, right? I got busted for skipping school, missed a football game, suspended for a couple of days. It all ended badly. But when I look at that, I saw the commonality of, hey, when you're around this guy, you don't make good decisions, right? He influences you. So now that's not pushing the air. That was my decision. I made a bad decision. I paid for it. I learned from it. But that's kind of what I mean by don't look for the outcomes, even though the outcome would have told me I made a mistake. Look for patterns. And so I began to realize every time that this gentleman came around me, I had to be on my guard not to do something really stupid, right? So if you do those kind of things, you'll begin to notice your pattern. When you notice your pattern, you can start to decouple those circumstantial factors or situational factors, and your errors get reduced. If they don't reduce, then you got to develop some countermeasures, like the ones I gave you about fatigue and time pressure and all that. And then you tweak it until it fits your life. So this is a really important topic to me, going all the way back to what we began to talk about in the very beginning, because people die from simple mistakes. People that I may have had a chance to influence died because of mistakes. I've had very many close calls myself, and when I look back, it was like, wow, why didn't you see that coming? So we can't take to err is human. By the way, the back part of Cicero's quote you never hear is, to persevere in error is only the act of a fool. We can't take that as an excuse to allow errors to continue to rob from our performance, from our happiness, from our wealth, from our life, right? So, okay, let's wrap this up with a few takeaways. In general, I've learned that there's 5 primary reasons why good people make bad mistakes. Not to take away from the really important piece here that individually these may not apply to you. Individually, you have your own fingerprint. But I wanted to give you some general observations that I've made over the few years with this. First of all, we don't have the self-awareness to see the threat we pose to ourselves. When we do something wrong, the first thing is sun was in my eyes, my mom raised me wrong, whatever it is, we'll try to rationalize it so it's not our fault. And we also have this whole culture of self-love and you're great and you deserve all the best. And there's a lot of bad things in us. There's a lot of flawed things in us. So we have to have the self-awareness to learn to love ourselves with all our flaws and correct those flaws and love ourselves more, right? So number one is we don't have the self-awareness, and we need to develop the self-awareness to see that we pose a significant threat to ourselves and those around us. Number two, closely related. We may know what it is, but we don't see it soon enough or have strategies in place to counter them, right? So here comes Billy Bob celebrating getting engaged and with a round of Patron, and we better have a strategy for that, right? Not, okay, just one. That's probably not going to work. Hey, I'd love to, Billy Bob, congratulations. The next time, this round's on me, but I can't do it right now. I got a book, right? Now, if you don't have that pre-programmed, that's going to be really hard to do in the moment. So number three, we don't realize the impact of early bad decisions. Like James Clear told us, it's hard to save a poor early decision with good late decisions. Bad early decisions tend to linger and gain momentum, right? Like a gravity well sucking us in. In my own life, I got a book I want to write. It's on an unpopular topic. And I won't even share that with you. And the marketing research says it's not going to sell, but I really, really want to write it. It takes me 1.5 years to write a book. And that's if I'm hunkering down. I can't afford that, right? So I can't write that book. I've chosen an unpopular topic, but if I got into it, I would finish it. It's just kind of who I am. Don't start something you can't finish. So that's an example of me recognizing not making an early bad decision. Okay, number 4. The people around us don't feel like they can speak to us honestly to tell us about our decaying performance or bad decisions, right? Now, we probably have 1 or 2 truth tellers in our family, our husbands, our wives, our significant others. But it's important to be able to get more feedback than that. One of the best things I ever learned in aviation was from a study by a guy named Bob Jeanette. He did it back in the late 1970s, right, before many of you were even alive. And he discovered that what good captains do in the first 2 or 3 minutes of meeting their flight crew is an accurate predictor of their performance on a multi-day trip. And one of those things that good captains do is called a statement of personal fallibility, right? And a good captain will say something like, you know what, I'm pretty good at flying airplanes, but I still make a lot of mistakes. So I really need to hear from you right away if you see anything different, dumb, or dangerous, right? Because I'm expecting your backup and I'll provide the same for you. Wow, right? He just took number 4, our peers, family members, friends, or supervisors don't recognize or won't talk to us about our poor performance or decaying performance, and just threw that out the door. He conquered it with that statement of personal fallibility. I want to know from you, what am I doing wrong here? Trust me, I can take the spears in the chest. I can even take them in the back as long as I can find them out there on social media. You know, Tony's wearing that stupid Hawaiian shirt, and he won't put down a cigar or a pipe, and that's probably stupid. Feedback is great. Feedback is great in any form. Make sure you've got enough people that can give it to you. Number 5, and the last one, we settle for good enough. We become complacent. And when we become complacent, we lose ownership of our performance, our professionalism, and our life. If you want to conquer the really serious threat that we pose to ourselves, I call that the blue threat quite often, you have to take ownership for your errors, and not just the ones that end badly, all of them, right? All of them. All right, So that's a wrap on episode 2 of Only Human, where we try to take to task the important questions about what it means to be a puny human in a world that often tries to bury us in gigantic systems, make us think we're powerless. Nothing could be further from the truth, I assure you. So once again, please link, share, promote, like, love, whatever else you can do to get the word out there about what we're doing together. I hope to see you all next time when we're going to look into something that I think is really super cool. The life cycle of our ideas. Life cycle of our ideas. Where do they come from? What do we do with them? Do they ever really die? And we may even touch on the issue of immortality. Don't miss it. It's going to be a really cool discussion. I'm Tony Kern, and I appreciate all of you who took time out of your valuable day to listen in. I know you're all busy. Please provide me all the feedback you can, good and bad, and share what we're doing as far and wide as you can. After all, I'm only human. See you soon.